Thank you. I appreciate it very much. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts and ideas about transformative learning in STEM education with all of the assembled students and the faculty and others there at your university. What I will do across the time that I have is I will try to speak fairly slowly and clearly so that my English comes through okay. And with your permission, I may read certain sections of the various PowerPoint slides just to make sure that all of the information is very clear. But I look forward to sharing this, and I will begin a screen share if you will allow me, in order to get my slide deck up so that I can share this information about transformative learning in STEAM teaching. And I thought, oh, incidentally, you may recognize this picture. It's of some mangrove trees somewhere in Indonesia. And I apologize, I do have it written down somewhere, the exact location, but I was very much taken with this picture of mangrove trees. So I thought that it would be best if I began with a description of how transformative learning is defined with the definition that I like very much. And this comes from Dr. Patricia Cranton. I have placed the citation down at the bottom here, but it's a very simple definition that I like a lot because I think it captures very much the information about in a simple manner about what transformative learning is. And so she says that transformative learning theory is elegantly simple through some event, which could be as traumatic as losing a job or as ordinary as an unexpected question. And I'll come back to that later in my presentation, this idea of an unexpected question. Through one of those processes or others, an individual becomes aware of holding a limited or a distorted view. If the individual then critically examines this view, opens herself to alternatives, and consequently changes the way she sees things, then she has transformed some part of how she makes meaning out of the world. And that to me is a very, very simple definition of transformative learning. And I thought it would make a good beginning to what we will do. So to get a little bit deeper into how I conceptualize transformative learning, I think of it in 3 stages. And the first stage is the disorienting dilemma. And that's what Patricia Cranton said might be something as traumatic as losing a job, or it might be something as simple as an unexpected question. But the reason it's disorienting is because for the person experiencing that, it is outside of how she or he normally thinks about operating personally in the world or how the world operates. And as a result of that, then for transformative learning to occur, there has to be critical reflection about that disorienting dilemma. And I'll speak a good deal about what that critical part means. But after the critical reflection, if the learner changes or expands her perspective and or how she thinks, feels, and acts, then she has had a truly transformative experience. And in STEM teaching, what we want for our students is to have a transformative experience about the topic that we're covering, but also we want to help them transform their conceptions and their understandings of themselves as learners. There's really no greater gift that a teacher can give to a student than helping a student who before might have thought of himself or herself as a bad learner, or someone who doesn't like science, or someone who's not good at math, to transform their understanding of themselves as learners so that they then go on to be more successful learning chemistry, but also more successful simply being humans. And so this is the way that I conceive of transformative learning. And what we'll cover today in the time that I have is basically three areas. And I'll start with that idea of what it means to be what the critical part of critical reflection means, because it's extremely important in that step of transformative learning. Then I'll talk a little bit about how we can use critical reflection, not only for our students, but for ourselves as teachers. And then finally, I'll speak a little bit about making a difference in STEAM education with transformative learning. So the place I want to start here is this definition of critical reflection, because many students, when they come to university, understand the idea of reflecting on an event or reflecting on something they read in a class. But that's very different from critical reflection. And in the reflective process, very typically you think about what happened. That's sort of the what. Then you think about how you interpret what happened. And that's kind of the question, well, then, so what? And then finally, you think and or you plan about how things can or should be different in the future. And that's kind of asking yourself the question, now what? But critical reflection means that in the process of doing that, you also have to do something really, really important. And that is, you have to think through how your own biases make you see what happened. In other words, what are the perspectives through which you are understanding the event that might be your own personal biases that therefore are coloring the event or the information that you're considering. So for example, if you were presented with some information that is counter or contrary to the way you've always thought about something, it might be that that new information isn't wrong, it just appears wrong to you because of your own bias. A good example at university is, for example, here at our university, we have many students who come from small towns in Oklahoma where society is very homogeneous. Everybody is like everybody else in a small town. And there may be stereotypes that people grow up with about people different from themselves and the people they know in their small town. If a student like that comes to our university and she is placed in our student housing with a roommate who is very, very different from all of the people she's grown up with, that could be a disorienting dilemma for her that will force her to critically reflect. That is, not just to reflect on the challenge that she now has having a roommate who's different from anything she's known, but if she critically reflects, she's also going to have to ask herself, what are my own stereotypes and my own biases through which I am interpreting this situation? And so you can see that the critical part of critical reflection separates it from just mere reflection. The other things related to critical reflection then are thinking about how you interpret what happened through your own worldview, and then thinking or planning how things can or should be different in the future, because you have worked at overcoming your own biases, your own prejudices, the stereotypes you might personally have, which means you get beyond them in order to act or react differently in the future. So the critical part of critical reflection is very important. And so one way I want to illustrate this is to talk about what's going on in our own country, the United States, where there's a huge controversy about critical race theory being taught in schools. And people don't understand that critical part of what critical race theory means. And if you are going to teach about racial prejudices, if you're critically reflecting, that means you have to think about your own biases and your own stereotypes. And people who don't want to think about those things sometimes get upset at the concept of teaching about racial injustice and bigotry because they're trying to avoid considering their own biases. So, as an example of how this works with students, in our own state of Oklahoma, in the year 1921, there was a very, very tragic racial incident in which hundreds of Black people were massacred. And this is something that students doing a project started to uncover and to learn about, because the project was to help students develop research skills about things like instances of racial injustice. And so one particular student, and I will play a very short video clip in which he talks about his transformative realization that he came to as a result of doing this particular project. So with the background knowing that the students in this project were investigating instances of racial injustice as a part of that research project, let student Jake tell you in his own words how it changed him, because it's a beautiful example of transformative learning and the impact it made on the student.
Since I've been working on this project, I felt a lot more confident as an undergraduate student in all my classes, and I love research now. I'm not daunted by writing a paper. As far as being a studio art major, working with this idea so close to home of, violence used as a tool of like social control. When I think about the art and music that I personally create, and I'm less concerned about making something that's sort of a representation of myself, something about my own personal emotion, and I want to be the kind of artist, and I want to look at and consume the kind of media and art that is more important than the individual, that's more about these broad ideas. So I've been trying to critically think a lot more about what I can do as a student and as an artist and as a musician to think about these much more important topics than a self-indulgent kind of art that I've been primarily creating before I've been a part of this project.
So I hope that video came through. Was everyone able to hear that okay? Gail can give me a thumbs up if that happened. Okay, good. The reason I wanted to play that is because it's a perfect example of a student having a transformative understanding, and he transformed himself from thinking, when I make art and when I make music, I hope it's going to be art and music I like, and maybe I can sell it, and that'll be a good way to make a living. After he started investigating social injustice, then he started thinking, now I want my art to be art that will play a role in helping reduce social injustice. It's a huge transformation in that student's learning about himself and about how he's going to interact in society. So these questions that I put up on the screen are questions for all of you to think about regarding this particular student's experience. We won't spend time on them here, but if you think about, what change the student went through, what might have caused it, and what the faculty might have done to make it happen, that's going to get you started thinking about how to be a transformative educator in STEM and STEAM. So now the question is, what can you do as chemistry educators to prompt critical thinking among your students? It's a great question, and I have a few answers. So don't worry that you're on the spot to answer right now, because I want to share with you some information that will give you ideas about how to do this. I mentioned earlier that one of the greatest gifts we can give as teachers to our students is an understanding for themselves about their own ability to be good learners and good students. And this book that I'm showing on the screen is a wonderful resource for teaching students how to become better students. It's just a matter of doing some simple things, but most students come to school not knowing how to be good learners. This book provides a lot of ideas about how to do it, and the bullet points that I've listed here specifically relate to critical reflection. How do you get students to reflect critically? Doing these things that are listed are good ways to start. I want to highlight model the reflective process. If you help your students understand what you're thinking when you are critically reflecting to make a decision, that is very important for students understanding, oh, I see my professor or my teacher thinking these things through and figuring them out, even though she's a professor. And that can be a revelation to students to understand, oh, she's doing that, and she can help me learn to think like that. So I'm going to be able to understand these concepts myself. It's a very powerful thing, but it's a very simple thing, which is helping students kind of get in your own head as you go through an internal dialogue solving a problem. But this slide will give you much more information about the topic of helping your students develop critical reflection skills. And I've shared with Dr. Yulee the PDF version of this slide deck. So
Yes.
you'll be able to go back to these slides at any time. So now I want to move to the second part, which is critical reflection for both students and faculty. And I wanted to start with this quote from Patrick Awuah, who is the president of Ashesi University in Ghana. We can no longer afford to graduate engineers who can only follow directions. We must graduate engineers prepared to ask, what ought to be? Let me tell you a very quick story about Patrick Awuah. He's from Ghana, but he came to the US. He went to Harvard. And after he graduated, he got a job at Microsoft. And he was there for many years, and he rose to a high-level position, and he was making a lot of money. But he said when his first child was born, his son, he looked at his son and he said, we can, as a family, stay here in the United States and we will have a very nice life. We will be comfortable. We will have wonderful opportunities for all our children. But he looked at his son and he said, is this my chance to give back to the world and to society? And he decided that he would go back to Ghana and found a university for exactly this reason. He wanted his university to help students transform themselves so that they weren't just learning the content of chemistry or biology or business or whatever. He wanted the graduates from his university to be able to begin contributing to the society in Ghana immediately. So that was a transformative moment for him when he was transformed, when he saw his first child, and he said, I need to give back to society. It completely changed the course of his and his family's direction from the future. So it was a disorienting dilemma, the birth of his first child. He critically reflected and he changed what he did in his life from that point forward. What ought to be then becomes a wonderful critical reflection prompt that you can use with your own students. You can ask them, how should this be as a result of an experiment, for example? That can prompt them to start to reflect on not just did the experiment turn out the way it was supposed to, but if it didn't, what should be and what might I have done different to get the different outcome? But you can also use your own educating with your own students in chemistry to sometimes ask them, how can I learn chemistry best? And you can help them do that using some of the resources I referred to earlier. And sometimes you can even share with them about your own discovery about transformative learning for the purpose of, let's say, sustainability of culture or language or the environment, sharing with your students about things beyond just chemistry so they develop the ability to learn, to interact well with others, to work on a team with people who might disagree with them. Those are all incredibly important abilities that you can help develop in your students as you're helping them learn chemistry or any discipline for that matter. The other thing to note about asking the question, how should things be or what ought to be? When you do that and you have your students reflect on it, you reflect with your students, asking how things should be. That is a beautiful opportunity then to develop ideas with your students, projects with your students, about work in the community, for example, that address your MBKM initiatives that the country of Indonesia is eager to have happen in education. So this idea of what ought to be or how should things be as a prompt to begin to help your students begin critically reflecting can serve in many, many ways in Indonesian education. And so an example of what happens to faculty when they start working with students to do this kind of reflection and get the students' reflections in writing and then see how the students are thinking. This is one of our faculty in our College of Business who explained in these words why she was so excited about our process for doing transformative learning, which is the STLR process. And she said, just the transformation in the students, that's what she lives for. And the fact that she can see that, actually flag it and demonstrate for herself when it happens, to get her hands on it, as the way she said, it was just amazing to her. The reason it was amazing is because unless you plan in transformative learning in your courses, it only happens by accident. And for many faculty at university, hearing from the students in their own words the impact that the faculty member and the faculty member's class has had on them and their development as human beings is something that just doesn't happen. Faculty don't hear that from students. But when students are taught how to critically reflect and they are then prompted to do that critical reflection and to put it into words that the faculty can see, that becomes amazing and so rewarding for the faculty member. And so that's why it's really, for her, transformative to see this kind of feedback from the students. So, for critical reflection for the students and for teachers, when you're thinking about the student side, I've talked about regularly including critical reflection activities as part of assignments with your students. That is easy to do. But here's one you might not know about, and this is a way for students to give you feedback very quickly about what you did with them in that particular class session. Before they leave at the end of class, you can ask them to jot down what was the muddiest point. In other words, what was the thing we covered or we talked about or we experimented with today that is the most unclear to you? What's most confusing? And they jot it down on the paper and they turn that in on their way out of class. That lets you, after that class, then be able to look through all those students' statements. And if you see the same thing being said by a large number of students, then you say, oh, this is great feedback for me, and I can spend a little time next class helping the students understand that better. That book by Sandra McGuire that I showed earlier has lots and lots of these kinds of suggestions, including suggestions about tools you can provide to your students to be good learners. But for yourself to benefit from critical reflection, one of the most powerful things you can do to become a better teacher is to keep a teaching journal. And what that is, in its simplest form, is just where at the end of the day, you might jot down 3 or 4 sentences about what worked well that day. You know, what did you do that day that you could tell was really good for students and help them learn, as well as, well, what just didn't work? Because over time, as you look through your journal, you will see yourself improving as a teacher. That's very rewarding and it's very motivating. You can also begin a self-discovery process to find out what your own biases are as a human, but as a teacher as well. You may have a bias, for example, that the only way to teach a certain concept is this one particular way. And you might have that bias because that's how you were taught that one particular concept. But there may be other ways that would work just as well. In my career as a learner, I was a musician, and one of my teachers teaching me trumpet told me something once that always stuck with me. And he said to me, one of my biggest jobs as a teacher is trying to figure out how to say the same thing to get across the same point in a different way. Because sometimes, even if I've done it 17 different ways with students in the past that work, I have to find a new way to do it with another student, with a new student. And that's where this self-discovery process comes in. And then finally, I would highly encourage you to get together with other chemistry teachers to develop a learning community around the idea of teaching chemistry from a transformative learning standpoint. So the final topic that I want to address here is transformative learning for STEAM teaching. That is, teaching chemistry with other teachers, maybe even with other disciplines in STEM, or maybe even with disciplines outside of STEM. And the gentleman that I want to use as a really good example of this is Richard Feynman. You may not know him. He's a very, very famous physics teacher at university in the US. He's dead now, but when he taught at the California Institute of Technology, he was famous because he helped students grasp the most difficult concepts in exciting ways. And he did it because he had a father who engaged with him in certain ways that excited him about learning science. And this book, The Pleasure of Finding Things Out, if you ever get the chance to read that, you will read what Richard Feynman wrote about how his father helped excite him about science. And I want to share a good example because it connects with that idea of different ways of teaching things. So as a kid, many times kids, young children are excited about dinosaurs. I know I was. You find out about dinosaurs, you watch Jurassic Park. Lots of times children get excited about dinosaurs. Well, that happened to Richard Feynman, but because of the way his dad, his father, interacted with him, when Richard expressed some excitement about dinosaurs, his dad said, "Oh, that's great." And he took Richard up to the second floor in their house, and he opened the second floor window, and he said, "Okay, let's look down there in the yard, and let's pretend that there's a brontosaurus standing out there in the yard." He would be so big that his head would come into this second floor window and it would fill up this entire window. And that put a whole different concept about dinosaur into Richard Feynman's head as a kid that most kids never got, because they never had that understanding of what a dinosaur was in terms that they related to my own backyard, all the way this high up on the second floor. That head fills up the whole window. It's a different way to teach about dinosaurs. But Richard Feynman's father did that with him. They would be walking in the woods, kick over a log. There would be termites that would rush out, and his father would just stop and say, "What's happening here? What are these bugs?" And it would launch them on going to the library to check out a book about termites. You can see that his father had a big impact on him. And the topic that Richard Feynman taught was quantum electrodynamics, one of the most difficult concepts in physics for students to understand. But he took what his father taught him and he said, "How can I excite students about these concepts?" And one example is that he might start a class by saying to students, "Okay, imagine that you're a little bug and you're in the corner of a swimming pool, and somebody jumps into the swimming pool, which creates a big splash and waves. If you're that little bug, could you figure out, based just upon the waves, how heavy the object was, the person was that jumped into the pool, and how fast that person was going when he jumped into the pool?" It's a whole different way to get students excited about a topic in science. But Richard Feynman knew that he had to have that kind of approach to get the students excited. And he's very famous for his lectures because he was able to do this. So you becoming a teacher who excites students about science, about finding things out, about learning to be good thinkers, that's just as important as the students learning the chemistry, because if you do all of these things, helping them become learners, then you're actually helping them learn the chemistry in the process. And so this idea about transformative learning as an approach to teaching in which you help students critically reflect about their own learning, about how to get better as learners, and about how to be better humans even in society is such a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And it's one of the reasons teaching is such a rewarding profession to be in. And I'm excited for all of you that you are going into the teaching profession. As you can tell, I'm excited about helping people develop as teachers. So that's my presentation, and I apologize that it's been very much a lecture in this online format, but I am very happy that this has been recorded, so you'll be able to go back and listen and see it again. But I'm also excited about the opportunity to have some questions and discussion at this time. And let me stop sharing my screen right quickly. Okay. And so, Elma, I'll let you moderate a little bit here on the questions or whatever.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeff, for your presentation and talking about transformative learning and motivate us, teaching not only writing or giving knowledge for other, but also change the habit, change the thinking, and helping them to become a learner. That's a very good point. Okay, we go to the session for the question and answer session. For the first, I would like to have a 3 question for participant. Please, if you want to ask in Indonesia, is welcome. If you want to ask directly, is welcome. Okay, there is
Dani.
I see somebody raise hand. Yeah, Dani Randa Firdaus. Okay, time is yours.
Okay.
Dani.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Ms. Alma. Good morning, Mr. Jeff and Ms. Gail. Hello. My name is Danny Randa. I'm from Islamic Education, Social Sciences faculty. So as we know that transformative learning provides clarity and depth of knowledge to students or someone through case studies to improve critical thinking skills, right? However, based on my personal experience as a student who is doing an internship at school right now, this method actually makes many students feel confused and think it's complicated because of the HOTS or higher order thinking skill questions given by my tutor teacher to them during the exam. So my questions are, what is an effective way to make students quickly understand the material taught through this method? And is this method student-centered or teacher-centered? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Danny. I appreciate that very much. And I empathize with your struggles and with student struggles with that. It happens in the United States as well. And so my first answer would be that if the students are able to have their teacher understand his or her own thinking process for determining what is actually the important concepts behind determining an answer, that is going to be the most helpful thing. Let me explain a little bit better. Those higher order thinking skills, the questioning higher order, means that the teachers want the students to take a fundamental understanding of basic concepts, and as a result of that, combine those concepts because they understand the concepts to then produce an answer which demonstrates their understanding of the concepts. In the United States, Sometimes we call these concept tests. And the difference is a student might get an answer correct using a particular equation, and they would know how to plug numbers into the equation. But the concept test question asks them the underlying concept for that equation means that if you do this, what would you expect the outcome to be? And so I'm thinking that the best way the students can get assistance on this would be to ask their professors to have some sample higher order thinking questions they could use, and then actually talk out loud to the students what the professor is thinking as she works her way through putting concepts together to come up with that answer that is desired. And I understand completely why it is confusing, because for students in the United States anyway, many times the learning that they've done up to that point has been a lot of memorization. And then to get up to that higher order thinking level, it can't just be giving back memorized information. It has to be, okay, now I have to put together concepts and demonstrate some understanding of how those concepts fit together in order to provide an answer. So it's a skill. It's very definitely a skill, but it can be learned. And I think the best way, and I surely believe your professors would be willing to do it, would be to actually talk out loud their own thinking if they were going to answer that question. That, I think, could help the students enormously. And the other thing, Danny, is if you can't get a good answer that way, then Google it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jeff. That was a comprehensive answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Danny, for the question and also the answer, Jackie. There's two questions in a room chat. First from Ibu Elizabeth Rukmini. Okay.
Bu Elizabeth is the
Elizabeth.
lectures and also graduated from Miami University, Jeff. Bu Elizabeth, silakan.
Bu Elizabeth, do you mind to ask directly to Mr. Jeff? Bu Elizabeth?
Atau mungkin chat kalian.
Okay. Okay. I will read it, Jeff. The question. The question is like this. The degree of critical reflection might vary across student and teacher. Sometimes both teacher and student fall into superficial question and answer. Those may not as deep as we want as a teacher at the design process. What are your suggestions?
Yes, if the depth of thinking exhibited in the response by the student isn't to the level that teachers are hopeful to get, then what's a good strategy to work with that particular student at that particular time? Absolutely. And what I think can be most helpful for the student at that point are two things. One is that the student's interpretation of the question may be completely different from what the teacher intended the question to be. And so the first step is going to have to be ensuring that the student understands the question in terms of in terms of making sure that there's not a basic misunderstanding that the student possesses, which is leading to the response that she's given. So, excuse me, first step is definitely making sure that the student understands exactly the question. But then the second step would be And you would only need to do this the first few times would be to actually demonstrate that thinking process that will get them up to a higher level. And I would suggest this, actually try to find a way to use a diagram or a visual or some kind of manipulable to demonstrate the concepts as a part of helping the student understand exactly what you're trying to go for. The idea of a concept map or how individual ideas connect up as a visual can many times help students start to get up to a higher level of conceptual understanding, especially if you provide them, for example, an incomplete map, and then as a homework assignment, they can fill in the missing information in the particular shapes on the diagram. That's one way to help jumpstart students thinking about these higher order levels of understanding.
Thank you, Pak Jeff. Very clear and inspiring too. Thank you,
So,
Jeff.
thank you, Bubet. So Bubet is graduated from Miami University, Jeff.
Oh.
Same. Thank you, Bubet.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bubet,
Bu
for the
Yuli.
question.
Thank you, Bu Elma.
Thank you.
Okay. Jeff, again, in the room chat, there is a question from our student, Rafi Al-Badri. Rafi, do you want to ask directly? This is a
Yes.
very long question. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Bu Elma. First, good morning from Jakarta, Mr. Jeff King. I'm Rafi from Chemistry Education students, UNJ. Thank you for sharing about transformative learning in STEM teaching. First, I would like to ask about transformative learning, including is all the stages that you have showed to us, and to change the students and develop their critical thinking. So it needs a creative way of teaching in STEM to solve community problems, such as we have design thinking to improve students' process skills. So what's your perspective on the creative learning, especially to transform the students, and why it is important, the challenging parts, the assessing it, especially now we are in the blended learning, so there may be learning losses from the students after the online learning, so it transform the student not only from transform of knowledge to the transform themselves and make a project that benefit to the society. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And you make a really good point about the circumstances that the pandemic has forced upon us with the online learning or the hybrid learning and so forth. But what I would say is that one thing you have to remember about critical reflection and transformative learning is that students develop these skills over time. And so if you're teaching a class and maybe you have the students for 9 months' time in that class, the ability that they will develop to critically reflect and to come to some transformative understandings is something that is going to take them some time so that they see themselves growing as learners. So what I would suggest is that beginning early in the class, you give students opportunities to provide written critical reflection feedback, and you continue to do that regularly over the course of the class. because over time, the students will start to understand and they'll start to see themselves putting concepts together. But if you don't prompt them and ask them to think about their own learning, then many times they don't put things together. And because they're not thinking about their own learning and how what they learned yesterday might connect to what is coming up the next day, then they miss putting concepts together. And that's one of the big reasons that they struggle sometimes with higher order thinking skills. So I would say build in opportunities for the students to provide critical reflection as a regular part of what you do. And there are great ideas in that one book from Sandra McGuire about how to do that. Because when you start doing it, the students themselves are going to start understanding how they're growing, and they're then going to start understanding, okay, what does this mean outside of chemistry for things I can do as projects in the community? I'll give you a great example. Our students here, when they go through their undergraduate degrees, they start doing reflections in classes when they're first year students, and they do them every year. And when they're in their final year, they take capstone classes. And those are classes that are meant for students to understand themselves related to their discipline. Well, what they often tell us is, oh my gosh, when I looked back and I looked at what I wrote when I was a freshman in a critical reflection, I'm almost embarrassed of how I thought back then. And so they see themselves growing as learners, and that really helps them say much better to a potential employer how and why they're prepared to be an employee if that employer hires them. So I think that the key here is regular critical reflection, because then the students will start seeing themselves putting concepts together and also start seeing themselves as learners who can do projects in their community for the betterment of the community.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jeff, for a clear explanation. So the important thing is the regular critical reflection. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rafi, for the question and for the answer, Jeff. A very comprehensive answer. Okay. Is there any question again?
On the chat, Ma.
On
Hannah.
chat. Okay. Oh yeah, Hannah. Okay, there is a question from Hannah Angelina. Hannah, do you want to ask directly, please?
Okay, thank you, Miss Alma. Thank you, Sir Jeff, for the nice presentation. I am Hannah Angelina from Sanata Dharma University. In my university, the students should write the reflection after the lecture has finished. And I try to use that method in the schools. I ever ask students to write a reflection about chemistry topics. The topics is about hydrocarbon and stoichiometry. And I asked them to create a project about those topics. But the students said that they are preferred to do the usual tasks, like just to calculating or define something, or just the usual tasks like that. I prefer to study the fast way. So they prefer to memorize the equation as much as possible without understanding what concept of um,
Okay, I think I lost just the very end of your question, but I think I know what that was. And what you described is very common in education in general. Let me make a couple suggestions. And one is to just go to the internet and search on the term, the name, Eric Mazur. First name is E-R-I-C, and the last name is M-A-Z-U-R. I'll actually type it into chat just a second for everyone, because I mentioned him earlier in my presentation, but if you Google about Eric Mazur, you are going to find lots of videos where he talks exactly about the question that you ask and what he had to learn to do as a teacher so that the students wouldn't do exactly what you said they did. A fascinating story about him is when the very first concept tests were developed for introductory physics, he read the journal article that said introductory physics students can earn A's and not understand the basic concepts or not come up with a good project. And he read the article and he said, not my students, because his students were smart students. He was teaching at Harvard, but then he had the courage to go and get one of those concept tests and give it to his students. And he was shocked to discover that some of his best students couldn't do what you're asking your students to do, because they had trained themselves to know how to do calculations and to come up with the right result from working an equation, but they had not thought about the basic concepts so that they could create a good project. And so what Mazur decided to do was, as a result of some questions he asked himself. And the first question he asked himself was, well, did my students not understand the concepts because they're dumb? And he was at Harvard, and these are brilliant students, so he knew that's not the problem. Then he asked, well, is it a bad textbook? Well, no, that wasn't the problem. It was a very good textbook. And finally, he asked himself, could it be me and the way I'm teaching? And when he decided to go looking to see if he could figure different ways to teach to help the students want to give answers to problems that were not just plugging in numbers into an equation, he found some great ways to get the students to do it and for them to be excited about it. And when you look at some of his videos, he has videos showing his students in large lecture halls. He teaches 200, 300 students at a time, but he's figured out how to do this for active learning. And that's why I suggest Googling about Eric Mazur, and you'll find a lot of really great answers for how to do things differently so that the students will actually want to do what you're asking them to do.
Thank you for the clear explanation.
Thank you. It's a great question, and a faculty in the United States and all over the world struggle with that question, I can guarantee you.
Not only in Indonesia, yeah, but also all the students in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, one comment, Elma, on that point, one of the things that's so exciting for you students right now, becoming educators, is that you are becoming educators at a time when education science and brain science and how humans learn has advanced enough that how people assumed things were for teaching and learning, now we're finding out, no, that's not necessarily the best way to do things. And so you're becoming chemistry educators at a time when you can benefit from the discoveries made about how the brain learns best, and why certain study processes are so much more effective than others, and how you as a teacher can do some simple things in how you structure your lessons, especially over time, so that your students learn easier just because that's the way their brains work. So it's a very exciting time to be learning how to be an educator, because you can take advantage of all this great information.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Miss Yuli want to ask something. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity, Bu Elma. So, Jeff, that we have discussing regarding the STEM project-based learning that has been applied in Indonesia, because usually in Indonesia we use the project-based learning. So the student creating the project based on the disciplines of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. It is already challenging for us because in the elementary school, year 1 into year 3, it is quite easy because they already learn throughout the thematic approach. But for the high school students, they just learn discipline with it in a discipline, means like chemistry, physics, biology, and so on. So do you have any experience regarding that STEM project-based learning, and then how to implement, because I'm curious that how to integrate with social science, civics education, so not only the STEM itself, the STEM, but also with the other social science, because I have a look in US seems to be really develop in across curricula, not only in the STEM subject. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, and I totally understand, and my answer or my thoughts may surprise you. And what I mean by that is the students in the early years, grades 1 through 3, in many ways, they are natural, eager learners. Children of that age are literally naturally good learners. As they advance through school, however, we kind of train them out of their good, natural, fun learning approaches because of what we do in schools. And so what I think part of the challenge is that in the early years, the students are learning in ways that teachers might think, or educators might think, okay, we'll let the students learn this way because that's the way young children need to learn and have to learn. But then we start thinking, oh, when they get older, they shouldn't be using those same ways of learning. And really, if we can keep more of those natural learning methods in place as students get older, I think that we would be much more effective. But for the project-based approaches with STEAM and the interdisciplinary approaches, having the students in your system, the students will be, or you want them to be working, for example, with each other in schools or in the communities doing projects, STEAM-based projects. Is that the way it's set up?
It can be like, even in the chemistry classroom, they can see different perspective from social science, like how the societies, for example, like this, we have difficulty to get the clean water. And then we engage the student with the case-based learning, and then they will develop the project of STEAM, like develop the filtration for the waters. So they engage with the problems of the society has a problems of getting a clean water, and they try to find out the solution. So we didn't give the solution, the project as a solution, but we didn't get what is the project. They have to develop their creativity. What is the problem solution through the project, the STEAM project, something like that, Jeff.
Oh, so they actually have to develop the ideas for the projects?
Yes.
Oh.
Solve the problem of the clean water. Clean water is the way to stimulate their higher order thinking skill, that being a critical of the associative problems. So it can be different ways, and then it related into the concept as well. For example, in chemistry, we have the concept of filtration as well, the material and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these projects could be that, or they could be other kinds of projects as well.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, that kind of hands-on learning or hands-on application of the concepts, for example, with clean water, the filtration concepts that they had to learn in chemistry, that's a beautiful way of helping the students learn, because they have to apply what it is that was taught. But I'll bet you in many instances, the students themselves figuring out how to do that application is what really becomes the challenge for them.
Yes, right.
They can kind of feel at a loss when they're trying to figure out solutions. And what I think is the key thing there, Yuli, is that if in their education where they were learning about the filtration concepts, there were some projects, some real world projects as case studies, where the instructor is able to say, okay, here's the case, and here's the challenge that we have to solve for this pretend problem that they're actually thinking about and working with as a group in the classroom. If the instructor is able to say, okay, here's the pretend case, here's what has to be the outcome, in other words, the solution. Now, let's start thinking about our processes based on what we know. And I don't know, Yuli, if there is yet in Indonesian education the design thinking approach. It's out of Stanford University, and it's literally kind of a roadmap to designing solutions for challenges. And that roadmap, if the students got practice with that kind of a roadmap with a case study, then I think they would be able to replicate that approach, that design thinking approach in the real world, and they wouldn't be so at a loss, or they wouldn't be thinking, where do we even start? Because if they've got that roadmap, then at least that might be, you know, they would all know, okay, here's what we do first, and here's what we do second. And that could be something that could help.
Yes, yes, right. So yeah, we started to using it. So some of my students doing research in design thinking as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Bu Elma.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Actually, there's one question again from Naila, directly to me. Naila, do you want to ask directly to Mr. Jeff? Are you there? Okay, I will read it for Naila. Jeff. The question is, I would like to asking about how can we keep our curiosity about something, especially in science, even though we can't find a solution to that curiosity. Because from my personal experience and those around me, curiosity tends to disappear when we can't solve it.
Okay, and let me make sure I understand. It was something about cities, problems in cities, or
Curiosity.
oh,
Curiosity. Yeah. How to keep a student curiosity about something, because in Naila perspective,
yes, yes,
her curiosity can be disappear
right.
if they can't find the solution to solve it.
Yes, exactly. And you know, the concept of keeping students' curiosity, that is one of the things that is very, very frequently addressed regarding how do you develop critical thinking skills. And on that slide where I had the link that I drew the bullet points from about critical reflection, there is actually information after that URL at that website that talks about keeping students' curiosity primed. In other words, helping students stay curious. And the critical reflection process is something that can help do that. And that particular link, I believe it's from the University of Waterloo in Canada. There's a really, really good explanation about some of the steps that you can take to help students or to prime students' curiosity so that they want to keep finding things out. Regarding Richard Feynman as the example that I used, you know, finding things out, learning, that actually has an effect in the human brain that releases the feel-good chemicals that are associated with a reward. And when students successfully learn something, when they find something out, in other words, when they get an answer to what they're curious about, that literally releases a chemical in a brain that over time can become addictive. You know, if you know you're going to learn stuff and you know you're going to find things out and you're successful at doing it, then becoming a learner, actually doing the actual learning, keeps students engaged in school because they always know on the next class, there may be something that's going to be an aha moment for me. The way that Richard Feynman describes it is he said, if you dig into anything, any topic deep enough, it's going to be interesting. And what he meant by that was, as you learn in the process of understanding more and more detailed conceptual material, you start to get rewards for yourself that push you to keep on going on. And so I think that keeping the students' curiosity up is something that can be enhanced with prompt, or it can be enhanced by prompting them with critical reflection questions so that they reward themselves when they respond to the critical reflective prompts. And I'll say this to conclude this idea, it does take an educator, a teacher, a little bit of time to develop good skill in creating good critical reflective prompts. With our own faculty here at my university, when faculty are just learning about this, they might write a reflective prompt that goes something like, tell me what you thought you learned from the assignment. That's not really a good reflective prompt. On the other hand, a reflective prompt that might ask something like, based on what you understand from today's class, how might you apply this in your own life to solve a problem you're facing right now with your family? And you might think, my goodness, how could anybody give an answer to that if what we covered today was differential equations? But the idea about good reflective prompts is that in addition sometimes to being about the content, at other times prompting the students to reflect on their own learning is what is going to be so rewarding for them. So even though the question or the class was about differential equations, if the prompt that students respond to critically is something like, where would you judge yourself in your own understanding of differential equations right now compared to 6 months ago? That's a good reflective prompt question for the students to start understanding, I have learned some things. I have come to understand some key concepts. But unless the students are asked to do that kind of thinking, they miss seeing their own growth. It's what I call the hair growing phenomenon. If you go to a barber or anywhere and get your hair cut and you come back and you look in the mirror, you're going to see immediately, wow, I look different. My hair is shorter right now. But every day you look in the mirror and your hair grows only a centimeter or less, you don't notice that as you look every day in the mirror. But if you had taken a picture right after you got your hair cut, and then you look in the mirror 3 months later and you compare what you see in the mirror with the picture after you got your hair cut, you say, oh my gosh, my hair has really grown. It's the same thing with students. They learn a little thing way back at this point, and then they learn more and more, and they put things together, and it's in little pieces over time. And it's not until somebody asks them to compare by looking in the mirror, what do I know right now compared to this little tiny bit that I knew only 3 months earlier? That's what starts to build the curiosity to want to learn more, but also it starts to build the students' self-concepts about themselves as learners that help them understand, I can learn this.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I hope Naila will be satisfied with that answer and also give us information about it too, about the curiosity. One question again, maybe this is from Safina Firdaus, direct a message to me because she can open the mic, something problem with the mic. The question is, many students, this is continuing the question from Bu Elizabeth earlier. Many students who answered the lecture question did not match what was the teacher expected. It was due to the lack of critical reflection from the student. What I want to ask is, how do students adapt to this transformative learning? Maybe that's the question. Jeff.
Yes. And we experienced that at our own university because transformative learning as an instructional strategy is not just new to teachers many times, it's very definitely new to students. And in our system of education in the United States, many times students come to university and they come from a system where they are expected to get good marks because they repeat or what they think that the instructor wants them to say. And many times in our system of education, that's exactly right. They get good marks because they've memorized what they think the instructor wants them to say. And then when they say it on a test, the instructor gives them good marks. That doesn't do anything to develop thinking skills. It develops memorization skills a lot, but it doesn't develop thinking skills. So when those students come to university and they're in one of our classes that has a transformative learning assignment in it, and they're asked to reflect, they don't know what to do, and it's very unsettling for them. It's a disorienting dilemma, one of the first stages in coming to a transformative understanding. And so what our faculty have learned over time can be ways to help students become comfortable with this, is to have students from former classes who have been at UCO, at our university, long enough to have adapted to the transformative learning approach and sharing what those students say. Sometimes that can be in a video clip of those students who have gotten used to transformative learning, to be able to share with students who are just getting used to it. But the students who are new to it, many times the reason they say they get frustrated is because, just as you said, it seems like they're not giving the professor what the professor wants. And the reason that frustrates them is because doing that in all their other education got them the reward of the good grade. And so what our faculty sometimes struggle with is helping the students understand that this process is going to develop the skills that you need in your life after graduation, and especially for employment. And so sometimes faculty are very successful in helping students work through their frustration as they're learning to reflect critically by helping them understand that this process is what's going to make you more valuable to an employer, is going to get you a better job that pays more money. Now, granted, that's external motivation, but for some students, it's a good way to help them understand, okay, when I learned how to walk, I fell a lot, but I eventually learned it. Or when I learned whatever subject they liked in secondary school, eventually I got there. It's going to be the same thing with developing my critical reflection skills. And if they hear from other students that one, those students did develop that skill, and two, why those students have discovered that critical thinking is so good, that can be very powerful. So if you have some students that succeed in this paradigm of responding in these ways that the faculty are looking for higher order skills, then have those students make very short video clips. You can actually use them as a kind of marketing to students that are just starting to get used to this kind of education. But I'll guarantee you, and all of you as faculty probably know some students that have figured out how to do this. Get them to share their ideas with other students, and that can be in a video clip. It could be in a very short essay. One thing that I did when I was a teacher is I would have students in a class, at the end of that class, write a letter to students who were going to start that class the next term, and to give them advice. And that turned out to be very helpful for the students who started the class the next term, because many times those students that wrote those letters said, oh, don't feel bad when the first week of class you struggled doing this, because I did too, but here's what I did to succeed. Students hearing from other students is really, really powerful. So finding some ways to help students who succeed doing it share with other students can be a very powerful strategy.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I hope Safina, okay, Safina, say thank you to you.
Thanks.
That's from Safina. Thank you so much, Jeff, for the explanation. I think that's all of the question. There is no question anymore. I can't see in the room chat. Or maybe anyone want to ask again? No? Okay, that's enough, I think. Again, thank you so much for your informative and very interesting explanation about transformative learning. So it can insight our knowledge again about transformative learning, especially how we apply it into STEM.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Before
it's
we
been,
close. Okay, Jeff?
I was going to say it's been a great pleasure to share, and I know that transformative learning in STEM is very big topic in higher education globally, and the success that people are having with transformative learning for sustainability, for example, is very heartening around the world. And environmental sustainability is going to take chemists and biologists and physicists, and being teachers, educating in those disciplines to help something as important as a sustainable future. I'm excited that transformative learning for STEM is something that is now being adopted more and more.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. That's a very more interesting again.
Yes.
Maybe many questions that not enough time to answer many
Yes.
questions in here. So maybe in another occasion we will meet again, or maybe we can feel free to give an email or chat from us, yeah, Jeff.
Yes, absolutely. The PDF of the PowerPoint that I shared, and I think maybe Yuli might have put a link to it in the chat.
Yes.
Yes.
We usually already share in the room chat.
Yeah.
PDF, yeah. So